Hello everyone, and welcome to a new video on my YouTube channel, Anton GF. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez, and I am coming to you from the front porch of my house here in Jackson, in the state of Tennessee, in the United States of America. And today I want to talk about something that hasn't been talked about or written about very much, at least in English, and that is the round-the-world sailing trip taken between 1974 and 1978 by the Belgian singer Jacques Brel. I talked about Jacques Brel on the channel before in English as well. There's a video called Jacques Brel, Poet and Chansonnier that if you would like to check out, you could. It's available also on my YouTube channel, Anton GF. But this talk today has to do with a collaboration I did on a Spanish-speaking podcast several months ago, in which I talked precisely about this round-the-world sailing trip that Jacques Brel took in the mid-1970s. Jacques Brel is a Brussels-born Belgian singer-songwriter and one of the most important in the French-speaking world. He wrote unforgettable classics such as Ne me quitte pas, which Sinatra and others recorded in English as If You Go Away, and then other songs like Le Plat Pays, The Flat Land, Amsterdam, about the harbor in Amsterdam, Les Vieux, the old people, Ces gens-là, those people. His work is really usually poetry set to music, and his texts, because of that, are studied in Belgian schools for their poetic quality. Jacques Brel was not just a singer and a songwriter, he was actually a very spectacular singer on stage. He didn't just sing the songs, but he also acted out the lyrics with facial expressions, with his whole body. More than a singer, he is almost an actor, and he's really spectacular and well worth checking out on stage. There are several video recordings that you can find possibly on YouTube and also on DVD, and it really is well worth checking out Jacques Brel's live concerts. He was also popular outside of the French-speaking world. This happened particularly from the mid-1960s on. His songs were covered in English by the likes of Frank Sinatra, as I mentioned, but also Nina Simone, David Bowie, Scott Walker, and then Mort Schumann and Rod McEwen adapted some of his lyrics into English, so much so that his songs even inspired the musical revue Jacques Brel is Alive and Well and Living in Paris, which I saw in Memphis a few years ago, and it really is very interesting. Jacques Brel was a multifaceted artist, always trying to go beyond the accepted standard and always trying to discover new things. His motto was Il faut aller voir, which means you have to go and see, and he was constantly on the move, to such an extent that by 1966 he decided to give his final series of concerts at the Olympia Theater in Paris, and he also decided to set music aside for a while to concentrate on other things. That didn't mean that he didn't write any more songs or that he didn't record any more albums, but he was concentrating on other things because he wasn't interested only in music. Some of the things he was interested in, though, had to do with music. He was interested in musical theater, for example. He was fascinated by the character of Don Quixote, the great novel by Miguel de Cervantes, and so he became interested in the musical Man of La Mancha, which he starred in for several performances in the French language version of it. He was interested in movies as well, as an actor in some films, but he also directed a couple of movies of his own. One of them is called France, and the other one is called Far West. He had this fascination with the mythical world of the Far West, and he explored that kind of theme in some of his songs and also in this particular movie entitled Far West. He was interested in aviation as well, and he actually became an airplane pilot and flew several planes in the latter part of his life, interested in sailing. And this is the topic that we will be talking about particularly in this video. And this interest in sailing came because it made him feel free. He liked the idea of being at sea for months without having to return to land. And so in 1973, he began to make plans to sail around the world on a sailboat that he had recently bought. He set aside between 3 and 5 years to complete the journey. That's what he wanted to do. And he began to make preparations for this round-the-world trip, and by July 24th, 1974, he was ready to set off with his daughter, France, is the name of one of his daughters, and also with his lover, Madeleine Bamy, whom he had met during the shooting of a movie called L'Aventure, c'est l'aventure, Adventure is Adventure, a film directed by the noted French filmmaker Claude Lelouch. By this time, Brel, who was married, had a mostly professional relationship with his wife, Mich, who stayed in Brussels, and he had several different lovers throughout his life, the last one of whom was Madeleine Bamy. But, of course, soon after setting off on this round-the-world trip, problems began to occur. The first problem, an expected problem, was that his good friend Jojo, whose real name was Georges Pasquier, died from cancer. And so Brel had to stop his trip and fly to Paris for the funeral of one of his best friends, who appears quite a bit in some of his songs. Then, while in the Canary Islands, Brel himself began to feel sick and was diagnosed with lung cancer. He underwent surgery in Brussels, so he had to stop his trip yet again. But soon afterwards, he was back aboard the ship, refusing to cancel his journey. So this idea of sailing around the world was an extremely important thing for him. And of course, the doctors advised against this, but he decided that he had to go see. Il faut aller voir. You need to go back to that idea to understand that Jacques Brel, knowing that he was sick with cancer, he didn't mind. He just still wanted to go around the world, and went back on board his ship and kept going. The problem is that after all of this, the death of his good friend Jojo, and then the fact that he himself was diagnosed with lung cancer, it got to the point where on board the ship there was lots of tension between France and Madeleine, between his daughter and his lover. And Brel's daughter ended up leaving the ship, but Brel and Madeleine kept going. At some point they arrived to the island of Hiva-Oa, one of the Marquises Islands in the West Indies, not far from Tahiti. That's where the painter Paul Gauguin, incidentally, had lived, and that's where they decided to settle. He was not going back to Europe. He decided he didn't want to go back to Europe. He decided to settle on the Marquises Islands, or Les Marquises in French. It was interesting because one of the reasons why he enjoyed being in the Marquises Islands is the fact that most people didn't know him there. He is far from Europe. He's far from his life as a public figure. And so he decides to sell his sailboat and buy a plane. And right after he decides to buy this plane, he begins to fly goods and also people from island to island. He also begins to screen movies for the islanders, and once in a while he received visits from friends who come all the way from Europe. The problem is that, well, despite the fact that his life was fairly quiet here, he was still flying goods and people, around, but his life was fairly quiet on the islands. The problem was that the climate at the Marquesas Islands just isn't the best for his ailing left lung. Remember, he has cancer apparently in his left lung, and the weather in this part of the world is just not the best kind of weather for that kind of ailment. He hasn't just rested on his laurels all the time that he has lived on the islands. He has also written some songs over time. Gets to the point where he has about 17 new songs. And so in 1977, already sick, terminally ill really, he decides to fly to Paris and record what he knows will be his final album with his usual collaborators, François Robert and Gérard Joannest. Joannest and Robert basically worked with Jacques Brel on most of his most popular albums and were a very important part of his musical legacy, of his musical expression. In Paris, we can see that Jacques Brel is weak and he's pale, his health is failing. But the material that he has written and the material that he records is excellent. The sessions are sometimes awkward, but Brel is usually in good spirits. At some point, he starts looking around the studio, around the piano, and he asks, "Has anyone seen a lung around here?" Even joking with his health, with his sickness at this time in his life. 12 out of the 17 songs that he had are chosen for his last album, which is this album that I have right here. It's called simply Brel, that blue cover right there. But most people know him as Les Marquises because of that song, which was one of the most popular songs to come out of this excellent album that really has some outstanding tunes. Just looking through the album, I can see songs like Jaurès, like La Ville s'endormait, a really interesting song about growing old called Vieillir. One of my favorites here is Orly, which is set at the airport in Paris. Voir un ami pleurer, to see a friend cry, is also one of the most delicate, the most heartfelt songs, intimate songs that he wrote in his whole career. There's a song specifically written for his friend Jojo, who had passed away not long before. And of course, the song that closes the album is Les Marquises, which is possibly the best known song from this last album in Jacques Brel's career. I have it right here. Really interesting album that I recommend to everybody out there. But Brel is not interested in promoting this album. After he records the album, he decides to return to the islands with Madly, and he resumes the same kind of quiet life that he had before traveling to Paris to record this album. But he is really not taking the best care of himself, sometimes not even taking his medication. I'm not sure about the fact that he maybe kept smoking. I'm not sure about that. He was a heavy smoker all his life, and not sure about whether at the end of his life he is able to quit and kick that habit or not. But he's not even taking his medication some of the time, so he's not taking the best care of himself. And by 1978, his health worsened, and so he was forced to leave the islands and return to Belgium, never to go back to the West Indies again. Spent some time in Switzerland, in Belgium, totally aware that he wasn't long for this world, and he passed away on October 9th, 1978, at the very young age of 49, just about 4 decades, maybe a little bit more than 4 decades ago now. All of Jacques Brel's albums are available on CD, and I recommend them all, without exception, without a doubt, and without any hesitation. But of course, there are also some really good compilations that may serve as good introductions to his music for the more casual fan or somebody who is interested in getting into his music. But absolutely, for sure, all of his albums are interesting and have wonderful songs. He has been a part of my life, part of the soundtrack of my life for decades now, and he is definitely one of my favorite singers in the French language. And not only that, but you wouldn't be happy to hear this, but he was a poet, and as such, as I said, he is recognized and studied not only in France but also in his native country of Belgium. And not many books are available in English about Jacques Brel, but here is one, and one that I absolutely recommend as well. There's one called Jacques Brel, La Vie Bohème, and you look at that cover and you look at that title, and well, it looks like it's a book in French, or maybe a translation of a book in French, but no, it's a book written by Alan Clayson, the leader of the band Clayson and the Argonauts, and as I say, it's one of the few books available in English about Jacques Brel, and it is a really good biography for any English speaker interested in knowing more about Brel's really interesting life and also really interesting artistic legacy. I'll say it again, Jacques Brel, La Vie Bohème by Alan Clayson. And this takes us to the end of this video, in which we talked about the sailing trip that Jacques Brel took around the world, or at least his intention was to make it a round the world sailing trip between 1974 and 1978, which is the year when he passed away from lung cancer. I would like to encourage everyone out there to check out the music of Jacques Brel, because it really is well worth your time. We get this way to the end of the video, which was recorded in Jackson in the state of Tennessee in the United States of America in April of 2020. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez, and mine is the copyright of this video, which you will be able to watch very soon on my YouTube channel, Anton GF. If you have any comments, make sure to leave them underneath the video, and I'll be happy to read them and answer them if need be. Thanks again, and appreciate your interest and your attention. And for now, I'm just going to sign off and say so long, everybody.